How's it going, everybody? Once again, free speech is on the menu for today because we're seeing an interesting turning point in this debate over free speech. So, in the past few months, we've seen free speech rallies pop up. We have seen rallies mislabeled as white supremacy rallies that get massive protests, people burning signs that say free speech on them, people chanting, saying things like hate speech is not free speech. Yes, it is. So there's a few interesting updates in this whole debate that I want to talk about, but the first thing I want to say is that when I say free speech, I am not talking about the First Amendment. And this is something really important that a lot of people need to understand. The First Amendment protects free speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of the press from the government. But when we are talking about free speech, it is a right that we as a democratic society believe in regardless of the government. Freedom of speech means that you have a right to say something even if it is deplorable, even if it's racist or hateful, and that you will not be physically attacked or harmed for doing so. Yes, people might refuse to do business with you. People might tell you flat out they don't want to associate with you anymore. And we understand those consequences. But someone coming up to you and beating you is a violation of your free speech. We see all these people showing, they hold signs up and they have this comic from XKCD where the artist, the writer, talks about how simply because you have a right to free speech doesn't mean you are free from the consequences of that speech. And I get kind of frustrated when I see this because I'm like, yes, we understand that all speech has consequence. If you tell someone, hey, look, a bee, they might run. That is the consequence of your speech. But they somehow conflate this to mean that if the government isn't suppressing your speech isn't being violated. No, free speech is a right regardless of the government. And censorship can come from individuals, it can come from corporations, or it can come from the government, okay? So when we talk about free speech and someone's right to free speech, it doesn't matter if the government steps in. It matters if anybody steps in. So when we see Antifa or these large groups going around and beating people for speaking, that is a violation of their free speech. But some interesting developments that I have talked about. One, we saw the Washington Post has come out and condemned Antifa. To an extent, they said that anti-fascists attacked peaceful right-wing protesters. But more interestingly, Joe Scarborough from MSNBC actually very passionately said, what is wrong with these universities, with Berkeley? They can't protect free speech. And the reality is we are seeing over and over again, yes, the government can't protect it. And it's not entirely the government's job to protect it, but we are seeing a problem with people trying to shut down the speech of those and stop this conversation from happening. Now, I do want to say it is fantastic to finally see the left, MSNBC, and mainstream journalism, the Washington Post, come out and say, okay, hey, this is kind of a problem. But the reason I want to talk about free speech today is because there's this really great article from The Intercept, and they talk about how hate speech laws in Europe are more often used against the left than the right. So Europe doesn't have free speech, not the way we do. When I went to Europe, a lot of people say, no, we do have free speech, Tim. Sweden, they claim to have free speech. But sure enough, you say certain things and you'll get in trouble. You'll get fined. There's one guy who made in my opinion, a pretty dumb joke on YouTube and is now facing jail time, and this is in the UK. So Europe is very, very concerned over what they deem hate speech, and a lot of this is born out of, World War II, so pretty obvious reasons. They fear that someone might use hateful rhetoric that targets, certain ethnicities or nations or religions, and they're going to use that to build up something that could be as bad as, say, the Nazis. But what do we see happening? Yes, we do see some far-right individuals, neo-Nazis and other groups, targeted by these laws. A lot of these neo-fascist groups use symbols that look kind of like the swastika, but not really. But then what else do we see? Pro-Palestine activists, for one, being targeted by the government, fined, and potentially imprisoned. There was a group of activists that were handing out flyers calling for a boycott of Israel over Israel's actions in the West Bank. And what happened? The French courts deemed that this was hate speech, and it fined these individuals. And that can be serious. Economic sanctions on individuals can be seriously damaging and stifle these ideas. So I think of this, I have an example that I try to give people. Think about our society as a car that we're all driving in. And we nominate somebody, we say, hey, why don't you drive that car? And this person's driving the car, and all of a sudden, a couple miles down the road, we see he's driving towards the edge of a cliff. Now you've got someone on the left and someone on the right. and they're both yelling at the driver, you gotta turn left, you gotta turn right, because if you go straight, you're gonna fall off the cliff. Sometimes the left is correct and sometimes the right is correct. This is why balance is important. You need both viewpoints for a healthy society. Because when you shut down both of these people and say, neither of you are allowed to speak, the driver might just go straight off the cliff and we all die. Now, to be fair, the person on the left and the person to the right could be giving bad directions too. But the idea is when you have a multitude of voices, when the conversation is happening, we can all weigh in and say, look, when we look over that way, we see a bunch of grass. And when we look over that way, we see a bunch of rocks. Both might work, and there's a different opinion as to why we should be driving on grass or why we should be driving on rocks. But I think we can all agree that currently we are heading towards the cliff. And that's the political violence. It seems like we have an active group of people that are saying, yes, please drive off the cliff because we don't like the car. When we saw these activists in Berkeley chanting, no Trump, no wall, no USA at all, they don't like the car we're in. Right? There's a whole world around us. The USA is the vehicle in which our society rides, and they don't like it and they want to go away. And that's what they're advocating. So they're trying to shut down any of these voices that might allow us to steer in a direction of safety, to keep the car driving. It is a bit paradoxical that you have conservatives, moderates, centrists, and some people on the far right advocating free speech of the far left, even though it's the far left that will likely be targeted when it comes to hate speech laws. And why do I say this? Well, for all the activists that are out there saying hate speech is not free and they want these rules to be changed, or they don't think the Supreme Court's rulings were right in the first place, let me ask you this. Who's currently in power in the United States? It's the Republicans. It's the people who you disagree with. So let's say these left-wing activists actually convince the Supreme Court or the majority to say hate speech is not free. And the Supreme Court rules that speech that derides a certain race, a certain person of national origin or a religion is no longer legally protected. Who do you think is going to be targeted first? The Republicans that are in power are going to point the barrel of those laws at you. Because like I've said many times, laws and precedents that are set and used against your political rivals will one day be used against you. So it's kind of baffling to see far-left activists calling for this kind of regulation when they're the ones standing in front of the barrel. To go back to my car analogy, we currently have someone on the right driving the car, and this is a person on the left telling everyone to shut up. Saying they want the driver to have the right to tell people who is or is not allowed to speak. And sure enough, the first person who's going to be shut up is that person sitting on the left. So let me go back and reiterate what I think is the most important point. Let's remind people the First Amendment protects free speech, right? So First Amendment's up here, free speech is underneath it. Free speech is its own concept. I personally believe in free speech, and that means if I saw someone on the street corner saying horrifying racist things, I'd probably just yell at them, engage in a debate, insult them, and get heated. But I would never bring it to blows. I'm not going to hit somebody. This is America. Say the hateful things all you want, and in my opinion, then everyone can know how awful of a person you are. When we look at these free speech rallies that were set to take place, that were canceled, what happens when Antifa comes out and with these protesters and has their event? They look bad. What happens in Charlottesville when the ACLU defends Unite the Right? They look really bad and committed an atrocity. I shouldn't say they, but this individual, James Fields, committed an atrocity. And it shows the country who these people were, the things they were saying, the things they were doing. The best thing you can do to a group, aside from actually supporting them, is to silence them. Because then they get to play the victim card. They get to go to people and say, look, we're being unfairly targeted and attacked and beaten. And then you'll see random moderates, you'll see individuals who are undecided saying, wow, that is not cool. That guy just beat that guy for no reason. The bike lock basher did more to help the cause of the free speech rallies by hitting this person over the head with a bike lock. Let people come out and speak. And if the ideas are good and we like them, then we'll use them. Not every idea is good, and not every idea that we will enact will be the right one. But it's better to have a multitude of ideas and not a homogeneous society of narrow opinion, because then you're just oppressing people. Then people are scared to speak up and speak out. Activism dies first. Don't forget it. But let me know what you think. You know, as much as I like to do more straightforward news videos, sometimes there's an issue that I think is so important that I just want to kind of rant about. And free speech is really important. even the speech of people I don't like. So let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. If you liked the video, click the like button. Stay tuned, new videos every day at 4 p.m. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Timcast. If you want to support the work that I do, go to timcast.com/donate. Give whatever you'd like or give nothing at all. My videos are always free and available, so stay tuned. Live streams periodically. Still haven't figured that out, but I'll see you tomorrow.